All right, Shalom. This is the brother Nahalia from the GMS Orlando camp. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakudash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yashar Allah. And a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word, in all truth and in sincerity. This is Revelation chapter 11 and verse 14. And it reads, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. All right, and I want to go into a lesson based on the recent news that touched down today, so to speak, concerning the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. All right, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. All right, and as you can see, the headline reads, Poland considers invoking NATO Article 4 after Russian-made missile hit village, killing 2 people. Now, many people, through the spirit, World War III is now trending on a lot of platforms on the internet. And the reason being is because Poland is a NATO member. All right, now we're going to get into that later through the spirit on why this is important. But I want to read a little bit of this article. All right, and it reads, 2 Polish citizens were killed by a Russian-made Slovakia. 2 Polish citizens were killed by a Russian-made missile on Tuesday, raising fears that Russia's war in Ukraine could spill over into NATO territory. It remains unclear where the missile was fired from and why it fell in Poland. The missile landed outside the rural Polish village of, not even going to try to pronounce that, roughly the same time as Russia launched its biggest wave of missile attacks on Ukrainian cities in more than a month. At the site of the explosion, about 4 miles west from the Ukrainian border, local media showed an image of a crater and upturned farm vehicle. CNN cannot independently confirm the photos. Video taken by a resident, which was geolocated and confirmed by CNN, shows a large smoke plume in the center of the village. Now, the reason that this is important is because, again, when you deal with NATO, all right, NATO is one of the big pieces of the beast system. All right, you have the European Union and then you have NATO. All right, which is what the beast is. All right, the 7 heads and the 10 horns. And the horde that rideth upon that beast is America. All right, because essentially America uses the EU and NATO as a vehicle to carry out their own policies. All right, this is why this conflict reached a head with Russia invading Ukraine, due to the possibility of Ukraine becoming a NATO member. All right, and this is why this conflict has escalated. Now, this is another level of escalation. Now, the reason I started off with Revelation chapter 11 and verse 14 is because, again, according to prophecy, there will be a third world's woe. All right. The second woe is past, meaning World War II, and the third woe cometh quickly. So a global conflict is prophesied in the Bible. All right. So what we see going on right now, dealing with Russia and Ukraine, dealing with the tension in the South China Sea, all of these different hotspots are the Lord's preparation for the world to fall into another global conflict. All right. According to prophecy. Now, again, we mentioned before that Poland is a NATO member. All right. Now, when you deal with what they mentioned earlier, which is invoking NATO Article 4, this is also important. So 2 important articles when you deal with NATO is Article 4 and Article 5. All right. So we're going to deal with Article 4 first. All right. Now, when you go to what Article 4 is, I'm just going to get the basic definition from Bloomberg. All right. NATO's crucial question, was Poland's missile strike deliberate? Now, I want to jump down because I want to deal with Article 4. All right. It says, what is Article 4? It says, under Article 4, NATO members can raise any issue of concern related to territorial integrity, political independence, or national security to be discussed among representatives of the member states prior to taking any action. All right, so what you have is Article 4 means that any of the NATO members can bring their concerns to the other members of the NATO organization, if you will. All right. Now, this is important because, again, if Poland really feels threatened, if they feel like their border is threatened or their security is threatened, they can call upon the other members to get involved in defending the border of Poland. Because you have to keep in mind, NATO, one of the basic NATO agreements, which is why a lot of these nations want to become members, is that you get the protection of all the member states. This is why when you deal with Article 5, this is extremely important. All right. So when you deal with NATO members, NATO countries, Article 5 is extremely important. All right. Because it can easily be used as a means for the whole world to get dragged into a conflict. Poland is an example. If Poland feels threatened, all right, they can request an audience with the NATO members. All right. And if the NATO members agree, all of the NATO members will then, in alliance, attack any threat to that member state. All right. So let's read Article 5. What is Article 5? Article 5 is the cornerstone of the alliance and enshrines NATO's principle of collective defense, that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Now, this is why this Poland situation is making headlines, because, again, it is a indication that this conflict can go deeper than Ukraine and Russia. And we know, according to prophecy, eventually it will. How it plays out, we're waiting to see that through the spirit. But again, all of these nations will eventually go into a global conflict. And that's according to prophecy. Now, Article 5 is important because, again, that collective defense means that even though Poland's a small, relatively insignificant country in the midst of all of these situations that are happening on the world stage, they can still pull up Article 5. They can still request that all of these NATO members fall into this conflict if they feel threatened. Now, 2 of their citizens have been killed, and time will play this out. But just going through the structure of NATO, all right, is an example, all right, and just going into some of the details like Article 4 and Article 5 easily shows you how this conflict can go from being a small conflict to a global conflict. Now, we go to Joel chapter 3, and I'll hit the point at verse 9. It reads, "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong." All right, now all of the enemies of the West, all right, who are relatively weak, when you think of nations like North Korea, all right, when you think of these different smaller nations, they're now starting to band together. All right, and one of the nations that they're banding together under is Russia. All right, Russia is going to be a guard unto many nations who oppose the West. Now, even amongst NATO, you have weaker members amongst the NATO nations. However, because they're a NATO member, they can be defended just like any of the other nations. So Poland can be defended just like France would, theoretically. All right, just like America or Turkey. All of these nations who fall under the NATO agreement, there's a collective defense that falls under that NATO agreement, which is why a lot of these smaller, poorer countries desire to be a part of NATO, because it gives them the protection of many nations that are stronger than them. All right, so when we go back to this article, it says Article 5 is the cornerstone of the alliance and enshrines NATO's principle of collective defense, that an attack on one member is an attack on all. It has to be raised by a member state claiming they are under direct attack, an assessment that then would need to be unanimously agreed by all allies in order to invoke Article 5. So Article 4 essentially brings the issue to the table. Article 5 is where they all either agree to defend this NATO member or they don't agree at all. And they have to agree unanimously, meaning nobody can disagree with the choice. Everybody has to be on one accord. Now, this is an easy way through the spirit to see how easy, all right, this conflict can go global, because we understand that according to prophecy, it will. All right. And a nation like Poland, all right, being so close to the conflict makes this window of opportunity even bigger. All right. You have Putin already mentioning the threat of nuclear conflict, the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. All right. And which is it's been condemned concerning the West. All right. Who has actually used nuclear weapons before. All right. But now we're getting into a time or a point in this conflict where NATO members are being involved in it. All right. And now we're coming into a time through the spirit where the Lord is bringing these things to pass. Now, will this directly drag the world into World War III? Time will tell. But we do understand that either way, according to prophecy, all right, World War III will play out on a world stage. All right. Now, continuing, it says, once invoked, all members assist the ally attacked, including with armed forces. To be clear, since its formation in the aftermath of World War II, this last resort tool has been used only once, 21 years ago, when NATO issued a statement that the U.S. would have the support of NATO allies if it took military action against those it held responsible for attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. All right, and that goes back to, all right, the description of the beast, because you have to understand the beast in itself, all right, is a system. All right. And the whore that sitteth upon that beast is America, who uses the EU and uses NATO to carry about their agenda, their interests globally. All right. This is why when you deal with the image of the beast, it's a beast, but then you have the whore riding the beast. In essence, using this beast to push their own agenda. Now, keep in mind, these nations, all right, are for the most part, are Edomites. When you deal with France, Britain, Russia, Australia, all right, all of these different nations are Edomites, even though they fall under these different new speak names like French or Russian, all right, or American or British or Australian or New Zealand or Swedish. All of these things really fall under Esau, Edom. All right. And they've split themselves amongst these different places and called themselves by the name of those lands. All right. They've changed the landscape and the names. All right. From their original biblical names and borders. And now they've disguised themselves amongst these other places by calling themselves French, Canadian, Australian, and Russian. But all of this is an Edomite rulership. All right. Now, the tip of that spear, so to speak, is America with the most powerful military. And America uses the EU and NATO to carry about their agenda. All right. This is Revelation chapter 13 and verse 1. And it reads, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." All right. So when you deal with the EU, all right, that's the 10 horns. When you deal with the NATO nations, the original NATO nations, you're dealing with the 7 heads. All right. Now, I'll show you the list really quick. All right. So when you deal with the 7 heads, that's Germania Major, the Romans, the French, the Spanish, Germania Minor, the British, and the Greeks. And when you deal with the 10 horns, we're talking about Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Greece, Ireland, England, and West Germany. All right. And these encompass the vehicle, all right, that the whore sitteth upon. All right. Because when you go to Revelation chapter 17, and I'm just going to jump down to verse 5. All right. And it reads, and the woman, you know what? Let me start up. Verse 3 reads, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." So America essentially rides this system, meaning they use this system to their advantage to push their interests. All right. Verse 4 reads, "And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication." Now, when we jump down to the 15th verse, you know what? Let's start at 12. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. All right, because when you deal with the horns, that's these EU or the European nations. All right, the European Union. And these nations basically fall under the command of America, of the West, even to their own detriment, as we see. All right. Now, jumping down, we're going to jump down to verse 16. And it reads, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Because eventually, all right, these nations that have allied themselves with America are going to turn on America for their own interests. All right. And all of these things are a part of prophecy. So while this incident with Poland is a small incident, it's easy to see how these things can escalate very quickly, especially with a system in an organization like NATO, where they have this collective defense agreement where if one nation is attacked, all of them must respond if they unanimously agree. All right. Now, we understand, according to prophecy, that eventually these allies are going to start to break up this alliance, and they're going to hate the whore, which is America, and they're going to burn her with fire, meaning they're literally going to shoot missiles upon her as well. All of this is according to prophecy. All right. And it's a beautiful time that we're living in because, again, you're starting to see the pages of the scriptures play out in our reality. All right. It says Poland considers invoking NATO Article 4, meaning they're considering bringing this issue to the other NATO members to discuss if a response is warranted and if the other NATO members will defend them if they need to. All right. So we're in a very interesting time. And even though this Poland, the Poland nation is not a significant nation on the world stage. However, because they are a NATO member, this is a powerful position that gives them the ability to call these other nations into a conflict. All right. So time will tell through the spirit. But this is a beautiful update because, again, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is starting to get hot and heavy to a point where it's starting to involve other nations. And all of this is according to the prophecies and the will of the Heavenly Father. All right. So I want to touch on that. Lord willing, I'll add these 2 articles in the description so that you can read for yourself through the spirit. All right. Lord willing, this was edifying. With that, I'll say shalom.